Hi, Pete. So your question is, you've been mixing other teachings uh, in with sort of, I guess, with mine, so to say. I mean, mine are coming from traditional advice and a bunch of other places, but stuff like the headless way, yeah, I know what that is. Basically, yes. I mean, look, I mean, mixing teachings is basically totally fine. I mean, different teachings resonate with different people. Ultimately, you have to be the judge of what feels correct and listen to your inner intuition as to which course to follow, basically. Because ultimately, the real teacher is an inner teacher. So, every person is like, kind of an individual puzzle in terms of what appeals to them. If you feel that certain things are leading you in the right direction, you know, try to use your uh, critical reasoning, examine it and see if it makes sense and try it out. Absolutely. Nothing wrong with that at all. So I would say, you know, go for it. Uh, I suppose the only possible objection might be is if that becomes a sort of substitute for actually putting in the hard work of practice, right? It becomes like a search for just different kinds of methods, which could become an issue. But I wouldn't worry about it too much unless you see that in yourself. So I have no problem with different methods, really. No, I mean there are many pointers to the truth, and no one method or technique can be completely comprehensive because what we're dealing with is beyond concepts. So that's what I would say. I mean, that said, of course, I can take it from the other angle and say, look, uh, if you have it in you to simply focus on one thing and focus like a laser beam, that's a good thing too, because the techniques I've laid out, if followed with total commitment, are sufficient. So, you know, there's that aspect too. But people will wander until they're satisfied that uh, they're clear on which how they want to move forward. So I generally say move with your desire. Don't try to control yourself excessively, and sort of flow. And the headless way and whatnot are pretty good. So I mean they're interesting. I have no objection to them in particular. Um, so the next question, let's see, is Giovanni, I guess. Every day feels no different than a dream. It's seen that all that happens within the space that I am, and that this world is impersonal. There's still seeming identification at times, while other times there's just impersonal happening. There's no worry about becoming free. Everything is fine, will happen on its own. The question I have is, what is the point of satsang? No one is here to wake up. Characters are empty shells. I'm the dream. Why host satsang? Well, why not host satsang? If everything is impersonal and no one is there, then no one is hosting the satsang. No one is listening to it. No one's here to question why it's happening, right? There's no more reason for things not to happen than for things to happen, because nothing's happening, as you say So there are no reasons either way. Actually, reasons are in the realm of events, in the realm of concepts, and what supposedly happens or doesn't happen, uh, in essence, for no reason at all, or for debatable reasons, if you prefer. Does that answer your question, Giovanni? So the question is, exactly, but there's still motivation and thoughts that lead a dream character to host satsang. On the one hand, it makes no sense. I just wonder what the motivation is after seemingly becoming free. Um, well, there's misconceptions there, because if we're all shells, there's no one becoming free. If there's no one becoming free, then there's no mind. If there's no mind, there's no motivation, there's no thoughts, right? So this idea that the character continues to exist, has motivations, has thoughts, and that those are the reasons for its actions, that entire paradigm is, in a sense, incorrect. The reality is nothing happens, actually, or rather, I should say, nothing can be said to happen. I mean, if you really want to take it down to the absolute, that's the fact. As soon as you enter the realm of events happening, and people in them, then you can't then mix that with the absolute. So then now you've entered into the character concept space, and then why things happen are debatable, right? In the character concept space, then there is unfreedom and ignorance. If there's unfreedom and ignorance, then there are reasons to have lessons to free people from the unfreedom and ignorance. If there's no unfreedom or ignorance, if everything's already perfect as it is, neither are there people, neither are there actions, neither are there events, no motivations, no reasons, nothing can be said, in fact. There's only silence, right? So as soon as you say something's happening, you enter into the space of ignorance, basically, and then different things hold. The reality is there's no waking up, there's no people, there's no teaching, nothing's happening, right? So if you're from that standpoint, you can't mix it with the standpoint in which there are people. If there are people, then there is ignorance. And then if there is ignorance, there's need for knowledge. So that's how it goes. There's a context mixing going on. Just to go on with Giovanni for a quick second, so there's no point to self-inquiry. There's a point to self-inquiry for those who believe that they're people. For those who believe that they're suffering, there is a point to self-inquiry. But the end of that inquiry will be to recognize that they don't exist as people. It's a paradox, of course. It's a paradox from the relative mind. The mind cannot understand, because from one side there is a point to it, from the other side there is no point to it. Mind can never understand these paradoxes. So now Pete asks, let's see here. So I was reading Nisargadatta Maharaj, and he was kind of outing someone who was looking to different teachings. But I think the caveat you raised was to ultimately focus. Yes, ultimately focus. I mean, look, I mean, it's as I said, I believe in following your heart, so be honest with what you actually want. And if you need to satisfy your curiosity, be honest about that. But that said, of course, if you thirst for liberation immediately, then you should focus on one of the techniques that I have outlined, either inquiry or surrender, like a laser beam. That is, no question, that's preferential. But the thing is, unless you actually feel that strong desire, you can't force yourself into that desire. Be honest about what it is you actually want. You might, if you pretend to yourself that you have that desire, you won't be able to follow through, right? So if you actually have a heartfelt desire to explore, then explore, because that's what you will do anyway. You might as well be honest about it. The more honest you are about it, the faster you can get through that process. Pete, your question is, what do you think about auto-suggestion to keep your subconscious mind focused on self-inquiry in those times that as a seeker seem just to railroad your ability to even remember to self-inquire? Many times throughout the day where I look back and I'm like, dang, I didn't inquire the last 2 hours. Well, yeah, that definitely happens. This is one of the reasons why in my, in my books and articles and whatnot, I often talk about dealing with emotional baggage. I wonder, anytime this happens, right, where there is a consistent roadblock. I mean, look, part of it is simply practice, but, and sure, you can try autosuggestion if that helps, but it could well be that the reason you're distracted from self-inquiry is not just random, is that it falls into some kind of pattern associated with some kind of emotional issues that you're having, right? Some desire, some hope, some fear, maybe multiple things, right? Relationship issues or stuff to do with your career or who knows what, right? So there might be things to deal with there, either in the practical world or psychologically, maybe through therapy, I don't know. But I'm just putting it out there as a generic thing because most people have issues like that. And while one way of dealing with it is simply through the spiritual practice, that might not be the best way depending on the particular issue. You might need to pull a different tool out of the toolbox and specifically work through whatever that issue is. So I would encourage you to look back at when you are distracted, at the common themes of what's happening when you're distracted. Why are you distracted? By what are you distracted? Right? And try to analyze that and see if there's might be something that you can deal with. Because usually it basically comes down to some kind of not being honest with yourself about what you want. That's basically what it comes down to, generally speaking. And it might not be something that you can solve on your own. Again, I'm a big proponent of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, as you probably already know. But it might be something you can solve on your own. And if you need therapy, which is, I've had for years and was very helpful in my spiritual practice, if that is something that would appeal to you, you totally go for it. So anyway, my point is, look and analyze why it is you are being distracted. That's my my main piece of advice there. And if you want to try autosuggestion, go for it, try it. But my guess is it's going to make a marginal difference at best. That'd be my guess. So, Giovanni, you're asking, at times it's only this, other times there's seemingly attachment to the character that appears. Should this character continue to self-inquire or just stop it all? At a certain point, it seems as though self-inquiry is a crutch and implies attachment. The very fact that you asked that question, Giovanni, should this character continue to self-inquire, suggests that yes, it must continue to self-inquire. Although, if you don't want to do self-inquiry per se, of course, the other option is surrender. What is surrender? It means ignoring all thoughts. But as long as any doubt comes up about this kind of issue, like this, should I do X or should I do Y? As long as that kind of doubt arises, especially with respect to the spiritual endeavor itself, you have to keep going. Is it a crutch that suggests attachment? Yes, it is. But it is a necessary crutch because you already have attachment. If you didn't already have attachment, this question wouldn't arise. So you have to destroy one attachment with a superior attachment, which is the spiritual attachment. And that spiritual attachment will destroy all the other attachments and then destroy itself. So that's how it works. So as long as doubts arise of any kind, keep going. And, clarity will descend upon you involuntarily. It's not a choice you have to make to give up effort. Effort will be taken from you. And only at that point is effort to be given up, when you have no choice but to give up effort. So keep going. That's what I would say. So the question is, in the end, will there arise in me, the total me, a sense of a personal character still here, or will the character operate in autopilot as it has with these oneness moments? Well, the real answer is it can't be said. So, these kinds of questions, right, about what is it like post enlightenment, et cetera, right? So it's they're unanswerable because they are they're trying to dissect it into the realm of thought, right? And really, enlightenment is a recognition that thought is an inadequate description of reality, right? A fundamentally flawed way of thinking about, of approaching reality. So, Ramana Maharishi was once famously asked, is there an ego or isn't there an ego? And he said, well, I would like to be in that truth where I don't have to answer that question. In a sense, that's really what it is. I'm not quoting him verbatim, but it's something like that, right? So it's neither one nor the other. Is there a sense of a personal character? Is there not? Is it on autopilot? Is it not? All these questions are in the realm of thought. And when thought stops, none of the answers, none of the possible options are true. That's what it is, right? This is why you have the Zen koan, right? And if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, it doesn't make a sound. Well, similarly, if you are not present to pay attention to the thoughts and to treat them as if they were real, as if they were meaningful, is there a personal self? Do the thoughts exist if no one's paying attention to them? Who knows? That very question is framed in the old framework. So the question's unanswerable, basically. You can only exit the maze totally, right? And you're already exited, actually. And that's the irony, right? You're already exited. Simply ignore thought, and there you are. And in fact, even if you don't ignore thought, there you still are. But these questions are all fundamentally based in the misapprehension of the ego, right? So the ego, which is a misconception, then generates questions like this one that are built on that misconception. They're unanswerable questions because they're built on a fundamentally flawed premise. Hope that helps. So I'm going to keep this open for probably just a bit around 5 more minutes, unless wait for any more questions, but I'm probably looking to end around 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. Eastern time. So I think I go through times where suffering is very present, and then when it spurs me to escape it, i.e. self-inquiry. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, Pete, you say that, because the irony is, right, that even, right, we don't think of it this way normally, but this is the truth, right? And the Buddha said this a long time ago, right? That the reality is even pleasure is pain, right? Even our best moments are, at their best, they're still not quite as good as simply, uh, simply being, just being. Um, so we think of, right, oh, we only think of self-inquiry when pain happens, but the actual truth of the matter is even pleasure is pain. And why is that so? Because it's always tainted with the possibility of ending, right? So even if you have what you want, it could be snatched away at any time, right? And that knowledge is there, right? The sort of the friction of up and down is always present as a background, even in the best of times. So that's something to keep in mind, right? And you have to learn this lesson over and over and over again, right? Even pleasure is pain, right? Uh, the Buddha said, thought, any kind of thought really, is like a red hot iron, right? And some people believe that grasping it is enjoyable, but it's not. It's actually completely insane to believe that. The only reason it's enjoyable is because you periodically let go of the red hot iron bar and you get the pleasure of no longer being burned. But then you grasp it again and then you let go, so you have the pleasure of again not being burned. So anyway, this is the way you have to think about it. At least from the traditional standpoint. Yeah, but yeah, no, it's certainly understandable that suffering makes it easier to self-inquire. That's very normal. Does this space that I am experience the multiverse all in the same moment? Is every possible dream universe already happening now? So Giovanni, again, these are questions that are, again, in and from the thought space. Thought and the questions that come out of thought are all based on the ego, the illusory ego. So the illusory ego, it's as if it says something like, if 1 plus 1 equals 3, then let me ask some questions based on this premise, right? But 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 3, right? So any questions that are based on 1 plus 1 equals 3 will be meaningless, because 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 3, right? So similarly, I mean, it's not exactly the same, obviously, but the ego is a misconception that can't be stated in words. That misconception cannot be stated in words. It can only be examined. When you examine it, the misconception disappears. In fact, it doesn't just disappear. It turns out never to have existed. It's that misconceived. So you can't answer any of these questions, right? Like the dream space, the multiverse, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all questions based on the egoic way of looking at things. Those questions cannot be answered within the ego space. They're meaningless questions, you could say it that way, right? And if you don't want to say they're meaningless questions, then the only other answer I have for you is maybe God knows. Because God is the highest concept in the thought space, right? So there might be some divine power that knows what the kinds of questions that you're asking. But from our spiritual standpoint, that's, you don't get answers to those questions. What you get is the understanding, the clarity that in some sense those questions are meaningless. In some sense, some profound sense, the thought itself is meaningless. That's what happens. So I can't answer those questions specifically because they're all based on a false premise. You're very welcome, Ben, Pete. Hope this was helpful for everybody. And yeah, I think I'm just about to wrap up. Any last, if anyone has any last final questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will wrap up. Gonna give it about a minute. And you're very welcome, Giovanni, as well. Thanks for participating, everyone. All right, take care and good night. Oh, wait, hold on. One last question. Is the law of attraction a thing? The law of attraction, if it were a thing, would again be within the thought space. Again, it wouldn't be a spiritual truth. It would be a question for science or a question for psychic abilities or something like that. It's not something which would be a spiritual issue, one way or the other. Does thought influence reality, or just drop all questions? I would just drop all questions. From a spiritual viewpoint, none of these questions are relevant. The only real relevant questions are, who am I? Is what it all comes down to. So law of attractions, whether that's true or not, it's sort of like asking whether quantum physics is true or whether, whether this medicine is going to cure that disease. It's all in the realm of thought. And there are places for that, but the pure spiritual has really nothing to do with it one way or the other. Drop all questions, drop all thinking, and just be. That's no question. That is the superior way to go from a purely spiritual standpoint. All right, take care, everyone, and have a great night.